Thierry, we are very honored and very pleased to have you here, and we thank you for your presence here. The floor is yours. Thank you.
Well, good afternoon, everyone. As for me, it's always been a driving passion of mine, the advancement and the empowerment of women in my own life and also as part of my profession as a lawyer. And it seems extraordinary to think that it's been 40 years since I was called to the bar, and I can say quite confidently that in that time that the law has changed as a profession for the better because of the increasing presence of women. Either way, it's certainly the case that in those days, starting a career in the law as a woman was not an easy path, though clearly much easier than for Clara, who started 40 years before that. So for me, the first step, after I passed all my exams, was to do what we call a pupillage, an apprenticeship, if you like, with another barrister, another court advocate in London. I was lucky. I did well in my exams, and therefore I was able to get a position in Chambers, working for a barrister who later on became Lord Chancellor, the highest legal post, under my husband's government. After my year's pupillage, he said to me, well, Cherie, you know, there are two candidates for this post, a boy and a girl, and obviously we have to take on the boy, because obviously he was the safer bet. That young man was called Tony, and I thought, I'm not going to let this get me down. I'm a working class woman. I'm going to make sure that these men know that they've got a force to be reckoned with. And partly because of that, I went on to specialise in employment law and in human rights. And I even went on to found my own chambers, where we try to focus on values of diversity and equality, as well, of course, as changing the law. But that could have been the end of the story, and I could have carried on with my legal career and perhaps even become a judge. But that Tony I mentioned before had other plans for me. And far from being a safe bet as a lawyer, he turned out to be a rather poor investment, because after 7 years as a lawyer, he gave it all up for the career of politics. And hence, he and I, because we got married, found ourselves at 10 Downing Street. And I was determined that once I left 10 Downing Street, I was going to do something a little bit different. And so I set up another law firm called Omnia Strategy, which specializes not in the typical law firm, but actually in a much more multidisciplinary approach to law. So we combine legal counsel with political, commercial, strategic, and communications advice to our clients, who can be governments, or companies, or individuals. But we are a law firm dominated by women, from the junior ranks right up to partnership. And we excel at every level. So what are we talking about? About women's progress in the law. Here in Spain, as in the UK, nearly 50% of the profession today are women. When I was qualified, it was 1 in 10. This is fantastic. These numbers are positive, but maybe they tell a slightly false story and mask a problem. Because even today, men and women do start their legal careers on the same level. But after that, something strange seems to happen. The more senior the lawyer, the less likely that person is to be a woman. For a long time, we've talked about the glass ceiling for women. But a friend of mine recently described women's representation in law firms and in businesses as actually a glass pyramid. Women are overrepresented at the bottom of the pyramid, particularly in the lowest paid roles, but they are underrepresented at the top. And we've got to change this pyramid into a square so that we see women and men equally represented, not just at junior levels, but as they go up across the profession. The law seems to be good at attracting women, but not so good at retaining and promoting women. In countries like Spain and in the UK, the cultural biases that affect women in the law and in business and in politics are not always explicit. The culture of the law is still driven by the need to maximize billable hours at all costs. And for most law firms and their lawyers, that tends to mean more and more hours in the office. And if you prioritize quantity over quality, then women will invariably lose out if they want to consider having a family, hence your reference to work-life balance. However, in truth, it is still predominantly women who in the end are the ones who shoulder the burden of childcare and who in the end are the ones more likely to duck out of the race because they can't see any way of balancing billable hours with the demands of family life. Governments have a huge role to play in establishing a culture through measures such as shared parental leave, extending maternity pay, childcare facilities, promoting flexible working. We can't just wait for the governments to do this, and even when we have laws, it's no use unless those laws are actually implemented. And so we have to ourselves take action. Culture is set from the top down. And it makes sense, because no one benefits if half the talent, the female talent, is lost. I think we women have to, as has been said, lean in. We have to ourselves be prepared to initiate change and act as cultural role models. Time and time again, surveys show that if you look at what makes a good manager, women score so highly on so many of those levels, better than men. But you know where women fail and where men excel? Self-confidence and, ladies, self-promotion. We need to take a leaf out of the masculine book. These are good qualities. And we should be prepared to push ourselves forward. And we need also to help each other. One interesting technique for that, which you might like to try yourself, is reverse mentoring. But what about the other way around? Reverse mentoring is when junior employees help and mentor senior employees. It doesn't require a formal relationship, but reverse mentoring means that perhaps a new perspective is brought into the office, discussing new ideas, discussing trends. For example, and runs an organization called Crowd Justice. This is an organization which actually we used ourselves to fund a legal case where we challenged the government in a case where no legal aid was available. And it's had a dramatic effect on funding and access to justice in the UK. And it involves setting up your cause and asking people to make donations to help you win that cause, in our particular case. Or take virtual law firms. Again, it was a woman who had that idea, to have a virtual law firm where you didn't have the culture of always being in the office, because there wasn't an office. It was all done on the internet. And of course, that allows men and women greater flexibility on how and when they work. Another way where we see women rejecting the culture of traditional law firms is the movement of women and men from law firms into in-house general counsel, where perhaps the bigger firms, the bigger companies have better, more flexible policies. Many women are keen to move away from the billable hours target of private practice and become general counsel and get involved in a more broad way in business. Because imagine if a woman becomes a general counsel of a firm and then a law firm goes to bid for their work, is she going to be impressed if there are no women on that team? Isn't she going to ask? They will want to work with firms that reflect the diversity of their own team and who show that they value all lawyers, wherever they come from and whatever their sex, because diversity makes for better performance. And we see examples of this already. Microsoft and Gap, pretty big companies, shall we say, anyone would like some of their work, are insensitizing diversity. because they're asking now for what is the mix-up, what is the makeup of lawyers working on our accounts. And firms that perform well are actually being rewarded not just with contracts, but also an increase in fees. Another example, the Associate General Counsel of Walmart has confirmed that his company has fired legal suppliers who don't actually take their diversity policies. When more and more companies are realizing their responsibilities as global citizens. A good example of this, of course, is the incoming EU Directive on non-financial reporting, which will require businesses to disclose their performance on environmental, social, and governance issues in addition to the traditional financial reporting. And in the UK, we have new legislation now which requires companies to provide mandatory gender pay gap reporting. So from April 2017, larger companies in the UK will have to gather data on any gap between what they pay to their male and female employees. Interesting for them to find out. But of greater concern to them is that from April 2018, they're going to have to publish this data, signed off at board level, so that not only do they know what's going on, but so will everybody else. So at the moment at Omnia, we're talking to many employers about the impacts of this and encouraging them to seize this as a very positive opportunity, because transparency is the first step to meaningful change. And of course, law firms, like other businesses, will need to do this too. But I'm confident that we are moving in the right direction. And I'm also confident that women will continue to be clever and strategic and resourceful in finding their own way up the legal ladder and blazing their own trails if the traditional firms fail to step up. So if I were to leave you with one piece of advice, I would say this: never accept that change is not possible, or that you have to wait for it to happen according to someone else's timetable. Change takes positive action, and it will not happen unless talented and determined women, such as those in the room, and talented and determined men who understand the justice and the common sense in this approach, step up and take the fight into their own hands. So let's demand action. Let's be innovative in the way we approach change, and let's succeed together. Thank you. Do the questions. Where should we do the questions?
I have 3 questions for you. Okay.
Yeah.
Have you ever considered to be Prime Minister?
Possibly having been at number 10 Downing Street and seen what you can achieve and what you cannot achieve as Prime Minister, I'm happy to stick to using the law to achieve the change that I want to see in the future.
Second question, Terry. How many British women are in the Supreme Court in UK?
Well, I have to say, I think we probably compare unfavorably with many European countries, including Spain. We have a disgraceful one woman ever in our Supreme Court. She is the deputy head, Baroness Hale, Brenda Hale, who's herself, she's the patron of the Association of Women Barristers. She's a huge supporter of women's rights, but she is the only woman still on the Supreme Court. Why do I think it's important? Because actually, if our highest court in the land doesn't reflect the face of 50% of the nation, if our highest court in the land doesn't affect the experience of women, because women do have different experiences from men, and we need, therefore, to have diversity in our courts, as well as in every area of life.
So last question, would be Brexit a good opportunity for British women?
Now we are in a situation where we have had the referendum. It's very important that we get the best possible solution, not just for the UK, but for Europe as a whole. And it's going to take a lot of imaginative and listening leadership in order to achieve that aim. And, you know, it's no use just ignoring the concerns that clearly have been reflected, both in Brexit here, in what's happening in America, what's happening in Hungary, what's happening in France. There's a lot of people out there who feel that they've been left behind. There's a lot of people out there who seem to be wanting to turn inwards rather than looking outwards. And we can't just say how terrible that is. We have to actually consider why that is, and then try and address that in a way that is actually inclusive and positive rather than negative and exclusive. And that's a real challenge of leadership. And that's what we need to look for and demand from our leaders now.
Thank you very much, Eric.